So I am here with Gary Hersham of Beauchamp Estates in London, UK. Gary has a 43-year tenure in real estate, is what I believe I read, selling some of the most expensive homes in the world. He has built a reputation of integrity, and he has all sorts of stories about his experiences connecting with and selling luxury properties. And so we're going to spend a little time with Gary today. We're going to learn about his background. We're going to learn about some of his stories, but we're also going to just dive quickly into the weeds of what it's like to buy and sell a house and the details of buying and sell homes in the UK, specifically in London as well. And so thank you, Gary, for your time. And I would just want to start by giving you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. I know some of it, so I might intervene and ask some additional questions, but tell us a little bit about yourself and where you grew up and what brought you to where you're at today.
You want me to give you 43 years of history? Is that what you want?
Sure, the short version.
Hold on, let me get my camera straight. Oh, wrong way. So I went to school, did my A-levels and O-levels and A-levels, went to university, got my BSc Honours in Zoology, Biochemistry and Applied Entomology in 1971, started a PhD at the Royal Postgraduate School of Medicine in probably 74. In 72 to 75, so it's 1 year later, I went to Theological College in Jerusalem in 71. I then worked for my late father's public company, and I found him rather difficult to work for. It was a mini conglomerate, 3 public companies. And a friend of mine came for tea on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon in my house, my parents' house. Said, I've just bought an estate agency. Would you like to join? And to cut a long story short, by the end of the year, I owned the entire estate agency, and I still own the entire estate agency today. That's 42 or 43 years later. That's it in a nutshell.
So where did you start? Were you there in London? Were you born and raised?
I was in Beauchamp Place in London, number 14 Beauchamp Place in London, which is in Knightsbridge.
So now you have around 80 agents and let's see, an office in London, Cannes, Saint-Tropez, Mykonos, Tel Aviv, New York, and London. Is that right?
Beauchamp. I'll run them up for you. 2 in London, 4 in the south of France, 1 in Mykonos, 1 in Tel Aviv, and 1 in New York. I think that must make 9.
Got it. So you speak multiple languages, is what I understand. What languages do you speak?
I speak 1 or 2 languages, yes.
Okay. And is that helpful with your customers?
French, Italian, Spanish, German, what would you like?
Is that something that you do actively use with your different customers?
Yes, I'm not perfect in any of the languages. My daughter will tell you I speak Pidgin, French, and the rest of it. But yes, I speak 8 languages relatively well. I can't properly write letters in French or Italian, or I can probably get away with writing in Italian and writing in French than I can in German or in other languages, but I speak 8 languages relatively well.
That's amazing. So tell me about your family.
How far do you want me to go, back or forward?
Well, just, how many kids do you have and whatever you want to tell.
Okay, so I have a son, Alex Hersham. He's married to Natasha Gertler. I have a baby called Avi. My son runs a business called Zen Cargo. Just put www.zencargo.com into your computer and you'll see what he does. It's an internet logistics platform for shipping cargo around the world.
Okay.
And it's a very big company. My daughter runs Huckletree, which is a mini no-debt WeWork. In other words, it's almost the same idea as WeWork, but it's more like a club. So they choose the people who come and work in their spaces. I think They got 10 or 12 spaces now, and probably around 350,000 square feet of office space in London. It's called Appletree. She is the chairman and founder of the business. My son is, I don't know if he's the chairman and founder, but he's certainly the founder of the business. And both are very, very successful. I've got 3 grandchildren. One is Aby, who I've just told you about, who's 4 months old. And actually, sadly, he's got a skin disease, which is called EB. And we're trying to raise funds to find a cure for this, because there's only 1 in 250,000 children born with this condition. It's a skin disease where collagen is not produced, so the skin erupts, and it's really sore. The poor child is on is very happy and very clever and very bright, but he has to wear gloves and arms and legs covered in case he scratches himself. He's only 5 months old. My 2 other children are bilingual. My 2 other grandchildren are bilingual in English and French. One's 4, one's 7. Both are bilingual, and both happen to be in America at the moment with their grandmother, with their great-grandmother in New York.
So you have somewhat of a religious background, is that right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Jewish, I assume, from what I've read. And is that what the theological work that you did in Israel?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you get some sort of, did you go through a specific program and come out with a degree?
It's not what you'd call a specific program, but it's a continuous course in studying Talmud, mainly Talmud, and it goes on for a year or 2 or however long. People can be there 4 or 5 years, but it's not a course that it's not like a first-year class where all the first-year class students start off at the beginning. It's whatever whatever is being studied at the time is what you follow. Difficult to explain, but extremely interesting. Only boys, lots of rabbis, very strict, long hours, and studying all the time. And I was there for about 14 months.
Interesting. I did spend a 4-week period of time there, traveling the country and learning geography and some biblical.
When was that?
So that was in 2005 with my wife.
18 years ago.
Yeah.
What took you there?
We just wanted to, while we were still young, without kids, take a little bit of time, and that part of our life was important to us. And so we joined the Dallas Theological Seminary, because we're in Texas. We're actually in Austin, but joined the Dallas Theological Seminary and did basically biblical courses with seminary students there. So it was a great experience. I can't believe it's been 18 years.
Interesting. Okay. And what made you do it? What exactly made you do it? You're meant to be asking me questions, and I'm asking you questions.
No problem. No, just the religion and faith was a part of our lives. And so just deep diving that part of our lives to understand the history and to see it in person, taste, touch, feel is really why we did that. So.
Excellent.
Yeah, great experience.
I'll turn to ask me questions.
Well, I guess moving forward, first of all, have you spent any time in like extended time in the United States? New York or anywhere else?
I'm going to be in New York next month. I'm going to be there for a week or 10 days. The last time I spent a lot of time in America, well, it was when I was 18 and when I was 21. No, when I was 19 and 22. So I spent 3 months in LA when I was 22 until my father called me home. And I spent 3 months after university or during university in White Plains and went to, it was White Plains College. My long-term memory should be better than it is, but I just can't remember it.
Okay. All right. So a little time, but not an extended period of time.
3 months at most. It's 3 months at most.
Well, here's what I want to do. I want to dive headfirst into what it's like to buy and sell houses in the UK, in London specifically. You can talk on the broader UK. You can drill into London, but really understanding how it's done differently. Here in the United States right now, there's some major lawsuits related to compensation, related to how the business is set up and business is done. So this has really brought to the surface the question, what is the best way to operate real estate brokerages for compensation, et cetera? And so I've taken—
By the best way.
well, what are different ways that real estate is done in different markets around the world, and comparing those and saying, what are best practices? And so I just want to learn a little bit about how it's done there. I hear that it's done a little bit differently than here. Here we have an MLS where we, when we list properties, we're supposed to put them in the MLS and everybody shares those properties. So tell me how it's done there in the UK.
So we have two terms when we're dealing with residential, two words dealing with residential property, which explain who you're representing. So the applicant is the one who is generally buying the property, but as an applicant, he doesn't pay your fee. The client always pays your fee. So if I'm referring to my client, I always mean the man who's paying my fee. If I refer to my applicant, I refer to the person I want to introduce to a property, and I do need a fee from the main agent.
Okay.
So that's the first thing. We differentiate the names given to the buyer and the seller to make it clear whether we do or we don't need a fee. That's just an overall description of how we work in England in terms of fees. We are very strict in what we do. We cannot take two fees. We don't have what you call in America the buy side of the fee. So you get a 6% fee or a 5% fee, whatever is negotiated, and you allocate half of that fee generally to the buy side agent. So I come along to you. I've got an applicant who wants to buy a property in New York, for argument's sake, Dallas, for argument's sake. That's a nice background picture of London you've got there. And I say, okay, for example, I sold a house in Washington and 4 pieces of land. I was representing the buyer. I got the buy side fee, which was somewhere between 2.5% and 3%, depending on which lot, which parcel we sold. And that was that. But the difficulty with that is, in England, you have a duty of care to your seller. So you're, in theory, obliged to get your seller the best price and the best terms. By the way, you also have a duty of care to the buyer. And the duty of care to the buyer means that you have to represent everything absolutely correctly. You cannot say, I've got the most wonderful house, and don't tell him it's right next door to a power station, for argument's sake, or take a photograph of the house and leave the rubbish tip out, which is on the left-hand side of the house. So we have very, very specific rules, and we're bound to them. We have to measure properties. You can measurements have to be within, from memory, 5 centimeters. Their accuracy has to be within 5 centimeters. So we are very, very strictly controlled. We don't have to have a license. We don't have licenses for residential property. We don't have to be, we don't have to have don't take exams or anything like that. But normally we are part of the one of the corporate group, one of the National Association of Estate Agents, for argument's sake. You can be a FRIX, a Fellow of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, or an ARIX, an Associate of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. But generally speaking, people don't have qualifications as such, but the experience grows with years and years and years of work. I don't know where to start and finish with your question, because there are so many things I could tell you.
Well, and that's what we want to.
Very different. It's very different. We are very, for example, in France, we have 4 offices in France. The theory is that the seller says, what's the net price to me? I want to know the net price to me. It doesn't work that way in England. We never talk about net price, i.e. everything. And in France, sometimes they tell you 25 million euros, commission compris, commission included. Well, we'd never say that in England. We would say, what's the asking price? 25 million. It's a given. It's an absolute given. I'm on a Zoom call, Mac. I'll phone you back. it's an absolute given that our fees are included. And if our fees are not included, I phone you up and say, I've got a client, and you realize that my client is my buyer, but I'm telling you that my buyer is paying my fee by using the word client.
Interesting. Okay. Now, do the brokerages have any sort of licensing or required education?
No, but we do train. We have various types of training, AML, anti-money laundering. So we're extremely strict. We have a lawyer in our office and a compliance team in our office. We cannot take on an applicant or a client without doing complete KYC on them. This is anti-money laundering procedure, and it's a requirement of HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs.
So let me understand. You have you represent sellers. Your sellers paying your fee. Buyers come along, and how many buyers are represented versus not by other agents?
I can't answer that question accurately, but I can tell you that the majority of the people who come to me are not represented. They're not represented. They don't need representation. And by the way, your American system where you have the buy side fee, but I don't see that the buyer is being protected or being advised by his agent, because there seems to be a bit of a conflict of interest there in my mind. You're selling a property to a buyer, you're getting your fee completely from the seller, even though it's called the buy side fee. How do you do the best job for your applicant, for your buyer? You can't. You can only do the best job for the person paying your fee, surely. Unless there's a situation where the agent's only there to close the deal, irrespective of the value of the property. So here in England, it is likely that if somebody comes, there are three types of offers you can make to a buyer, to a seller in England. An offer that's totally unacceptable, an offer that is totally acceptable, and an offer that the seller has to consider. We as agents have to be sure that A, the advice we gave in the first place in terms of asking prices as correct as it could be at the time, and B, that we don't put an offer up, or we on the face of it refuse an offer spontaneously if we believe that offer is far too low. Of course, we're obliged to report every offer to our clients, but quite often we'll say to the client, look, we've had an offer of 14 million on your asking price of 17, and we've refused it on your behalf, because we know what he's going to say. Right.
Makes sense. Well, in our country, in my brokerage particularly, we have buyer agreements where the buyer agrees to pay whatever the commission fee is that we charge for our buyer side. The seller often covers that amount, but if they don't, if they offer nothing, or if they offer $1 or half of what our fee is, then the buyer would make up the difference.
So in that case, you truly represent the buyer, and your job is to get the buyer the best price. Sure.
Right. That's right. And so that's the idea, and therein lies some of the issues that we're dealing with through the courts, on a national basis right now. Much of which
What do you mean?
So there's a couple of very large lawsuits that there's a class action lawsuit that is challenging how the commission model is set up, to which you spoke a moment ago, where the seller pays and they believe that that's normalized commissions, as opposed to encouraging more negotiation for buyers for commissions. And maybe there's an emphasis to have buyers pay for those commissions as opposed to the seller. Whole longer subject, and I want to stick to how we do it in your market, but that's what's going on. So just to recap, if I come to you, or actually just come to your country to find and buy a home in London, how am I going to find an agent? How do you help them find the property itself? Of course, here we have the MLS, as we had discussed. So how is it different there? And what would we expect to pay that agent, whoever's helping us, or the agent that's listing the property?
So again, unless you're retaining an agent, and if you retain what's called a buying agent, you will most probably pay 1.5% to 2%, of which some of it will be paid initially, way before they find it. They won't work unless they have some of their fee paid in advance. And there's a plethora, 30, 40 top buying agents in London. They will scour the market for you. They will charge you, by the way, you buy a £10 million property, costs you 200,000 quid. And they will scour the market. Their job is to get you the best house at the best possible price. It actually doesn't always work, because quite often I find that buyers don't want to lose the property. And my instructions, and I'm coming back to that in a minute, my instructions will be, what do I have to do to secure this property without losing it? So that's your buying agent side. We don't act as buying agents, we are selling agents. We get paid our fee, generally a joint sole selling agency fee between two agents is 2%. So each agent gets 1%, and it's generally split 50-50, so it's irrelevant who sells it. And the reason for that is because then you can have an open and frank dialogue with your colleague who works for another agency to be sure that we're handling the sale of probably the most important house in London at the moment. We're joint agents with Knight Frank. Everything is open book. Every buyer is open book. We discuss everything with them. Sometimes, rarely, sometimes they're private and confidential buyers where we're not allowed to release the name. But it's a much better system because everybody's acting in the same direction. All the agents have the same goal to secure a sale at a price that the agents believe is the correct price, not at the price where the agent sees dollar signs in his eyes and only wants to get his fee in his pocket. We are very strong on compliance. We're very strong on ethics. And most of the top agents in London have been in this business 30 or 40 years. And there are plenty of them, and they're very good at what they do. And we had a meeting the other day where we are joint agents with two top firms on a property worth, I won't be quoting the exact amount, but let's say over £150 million. And we had put a tenant into the property, and the tenant went to the owner directly and said, what can I buy it for? The owner said, not really selling it. And then he came to the two agents, what's your advice? And the reason I'm telling you this is because the advice given by all three agents was identical, absolutely identical, because we all sing from the same hymn sheet.
Understood. So it sounds like there's no MLS. It sounds.
No, we do have an MLS.
Okay.
But we don't have your MLS. We have LonRes, London Residential Research, and LonRes provides only agents and buying agents information. So you, for example, cannot get onto LonRes. Put it in, LONRES.
Got it. I'm writing it down.
You can't get in, and a buyer can't get in.
And is that a .com?
It's the agent's tool.
Got it. I see it. Okay, so the agents do put this. So how about what percentage of listings are actually in there? Do you have any idea of kind of generally, is it 50%?
I would assume the majority of agents' instructions, we don't call them listings, we call them instructions. The majority of instructions are listed on our LonRes platform. There are some discrete ones, or hidden ones as you call them, that are also in a way listed on the platform without giving full details. And you don't always have to put the price in the details, but the system that LonRes operates will always show you the property at the highest price. So if you've got a property in at 30 million and you don't want to show the price, it's certainly going to be up there at the top of the chart of what you're searching for. So people understand it's a very expensive property.
Is this website owned by a third party, or is it owned by brokerages, or who controls that?
No, it's not owned by brokerage, it's owned by an independent third party. One of the people who owns LonRes is a chap called Anthony Payne, who worked for me for 14 years.
Okay. So there's a monthly or an annual fee to tap into that, I assume?
I can't remember what it is, a couple of grand a year, maybe 5 grand a year. I don't know, but yes, of course.
How many real estate agents, residential real estate agents, are there in London? Just generally.
Got no clue. 5,000, 10,000, I've no idea.
I think we have
count.
19. I think in Austin we have 19,000 members as a part of our association. It's a lot. And we
What's
have
the most expensive property in Austin?
the most expensive. You'll hear in the 50 million range. I'm sure there's others that are higher than that, but on Lake Austin is really kind of the most expensive strip of real estate that we have. It's a 20-mile long lake. It's just close to downtown, and a lot has changed just in 10 years. So 10 years ago, you'd have the upper echelon properties were in the 5 to 10 million. Then they went to the 10 to 20, and then you started hearing about sales in the 50. And then the most exclusive sales can be in the 100 million, 150 million on these larger undeveloped lots that have been purchased recently and built. And we have a number of billionaires who have moved here and who buy up different properties or chunks of properties, including the owner of HEB. The grocery store is very popular in Texas, and they bought a big property on the lake as well and turned it into an educational system. Or
grocery store. What do you say about grocery store?
HEB is a popular grocery store in Texas, and the owner is a billionaire who purchased a very expensive property on the lake and turned it into an educational program center. But we're relatively small when it comes to the number of wealthy buyers here. So it's been an up and coming city, but it's really exploded over the last 10 years. So
London is very different. So our top end of the market, the most expensive house I've sold was 220 million sterling. And the time of sale, which was a couple of years ago, that equated from memory to $305 million.
That's amazing.
It's probably a world record.
Right.
We sold a house in the south of France for 200 million euros, which again is probably a world record. And we hope to break another one very shortly.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I assume that your position in the world, literally the geography and where you sit, and what the country has to offer plays into a lot of that. What is your thoughts? Tell me, and this is a good, I guess, transition over to London. Tell me a little bit about London. We only have 15 minutes, so I want to make sure not to go on too many tangents here, but why does somebody move to London? If you are a billionaire moving there, where do you want to be, and what lifestyle are you buying into, and what clubs do you want to be a part of, and things like that?
Lots of questions. Education, safety, being probably the most cosmopolitan city in the world. Walk down Sloane Street, walk down Bond Street, walk anywhere, and walk half a mile and you hear 10 languages. Every different creed and colour and race and nationalities in London, and there's very little prejudice. So it makes life very easy for people. People feel comfortable. There are wonderful blocks of flats for people who want to be in modern blocks of flats. There are fabulous period buildings. There are wonderful lateral flats with 4-meter ceiling or 5-meter ceiling heights. There are beautiful parks within minutes of where people live. Hyde Park, Regent's Park, Primrose Hill, all within minutes of the areas that they live in. St. John's Wood, Primrose Hill, Regent's Park, Belgravia, Knightsbridge, Bayswater, Mayfair, Hyde Park. It's a very, very cosmopolitan city. It's a very nice city, and people are pretty kind here in this city.
Okay.
We've got some wonderful new buildings going up. We've got about 14 new developments going up. Well, 2 are finished. The Loader building in the number 20 Grosvenor Square, number 1 Grosvenor Square, ranging in price close to 6,000 a square foot. Number 1 Hyde Park, which has achieved over the years between 5,000 and 7,000 a square foot. 4 and 5 Princess Gate, which achieved over 7,000 a square foot. And you have some wonderful garden squares: Belgrave Square, Eaton Square, Chester Square. You have some lovely, lovely, lovely houses around Regent's Park. Some have gardens, but they've got Regent's Park, hundreds of acres right across the road from me with a lake. It's a very convivial city. It's a city where it's easy to walk around. People are friendly. It's not stuffy. It's not overbearing. You don't have that many real high rises. What you're looking at is the city. Behind you, you've got the city, and we don't have a downtown, as you call it. We have the City of London, which is where the financial centre is, and Canary Wharf. You can see Canary Wharf in the background of your image behind you, but you can see all the low rises below.
Right.
In fact, I sold that building to the left of your right shoulder, to the right of your right shoulder. Ask me more questions.
So I will flip to a couple other pictures here. Here's Big Ben. Where's downtown in relation to that behind me?
That way.
Got it. Not far.
So you've got the bridge all the way down that way.
Gotcha. So how is the economy right now? And then likewise, tell me about the taxes, property taxes, anything related to buying and selling property and owning property.
Taxes, it depends what you mean. If you're talking about when you sell a property, who pays the tax? Well, the vendor pays his capital gain. So you bought a property at 5 million, you sold it for 8 million. You're paying your capital gain on 3 million. Certain things are allowed, certain things are not allowed. For example, if you've got a mortgage on you, if it's not your first property, if it's your first property, you pay no tax.
Okay.
You pay no tax whatsoever. So, for example, Brian, if you bought a flat and you paid 600,000 quid for it, and you sold it 20 years later for 15 million quid, and it's your main residence, you're home and dry, zero tax. If it's your second residence, you pay your capital gains tax, whatever that might be. I'm not quite sure what that's going to be. Probably 32%. Certainly not sure. And the buyer will pay stamp duty land tax. So, for example, you buy a house, and let's go to the high end of the scale, £20 million. You're buying it in your own name, So £20 million will cost you £22.4 million, 12%. It's a little bit less than 12% because the first million quid or so has a different scale. But it's just assuming a 12% across the board. On 20 million, you're paying 2.4 million. So your purchase price plus your legal costs comes to 22.4. If you're buying it through a vehicle, through an envelope, through a company, then you're paying 15%. So the same property purchase bought through a company costs you £23 million, not 22.4. And if it's I think I'm right in saying your second property, or more than your second property, you're paying 17%. That's 3.4 million. So it comes 23.4 million. So that's what the buyer pays. He pays his SDLT, stamp duty, land tax, when he buys a property.
Do most buyers, and I'm not talking about your billionaire buyers, but do most buyers finance the property? And if so, how much cash are they required to put down typically?
Well, let me just finish about the tax first.
Sure.
I missed one element. If, however, a property is already enveloped, so the property that you own is in your name, limited, Brian Talley Limited, and I buy Brian Talley Limited, I pay 0.5% stamp duty. So I can buy an enveloped property's in an envelope, it's in a company, and I buy the company. I'm not paying 12 or 15 or 17% stamp duty land tax. I'm paying 0.5%.
Okay.
If it's multiple residences, so if I've got a property which is 4 or 5 or 6 different titles, then I'm paying 0.5% stamp duty. But in the main, Brian, who buys a property in his own name or through his company, pays between 12 and 15%. That's the story about taxes in England. What was your next question?
About financing. Just the typical buyer.
So, typical buyer, and all the way down the scale, million pounds and below, probably they'll be borrowing, I don't know, 80%, 75, 90%. Up the scale, you're probably closer to 65 to 50%. So equity of 35 to 50% equity.
Okay. And who are the banks? Are these private banks, or what, how does that system work?
It's your, the banks give you mortgages.
No, I
And
understand, but are the banks typically private, or are they government backed?
the street, high street banks, NatWest, Barclays, Lloyds, whatever it might be.
We have FHA banks here, which are
Generally
government
speaking, what
backed.
happens is you go to a broker and he arranges the funding for you. And you don't know in the beginning whether it's going to be a building society or a bank lending you the money, but it doesn't make any difference because the interest rate's going to be pretty much the same. However, in today's world, where interests are, I think, 5.5% in the UK, you cannot expect to borrow much less than 8.5%, which is a bit of a killer.
So how is the economy right now in the housing market?
Very difficult to say. Some parts of the market are strong and buoyant. Most of the market is slow. People are buyers at the lower end of the scale, I feel, are holding back because they really don't want to have such a high interest bill. Somebody came and saw me a couple of hours ago. He's got one house he wants me to sell for 5 million quid and another house worth, I don't know, another 5 million quid. And he's got, between the two of them, £5 million of borrowings. Well, he says it'll cost him £200,000 per annum now, whereas beforehand it cost him, I don't know, £50,000, 40,000 quid. Well, I actually think his figures are wrong because I don't think you can eat if you're on a floating mortgage, you're going to be paying through the nose. Very difficult today.
So how long does you get a contract to closing the sale and funding the sale? How long does that take typically?
I don't deal a lot at the bottom end of the market, so I can't tell you about the bottom end of the market. But in my terms, on the deals that I do, we expect an exchange of contracts, not a closing, an exchange of contracts where you put your 10% down, irrevocable. There's no going back after exchanging. There's no grace period. That should take no more than 2.5 or 3 weeks, 10 working days.
2.5 to 3 weeks. Okay. Got it. So it's a pretty quick process. And what about inspections? Who does that? Who's responsible for that? And, does the seller typically fix things that are found?
What do you mean by inspections?
Here we have a termination option period. Let's call it 7 to 10 days. And you get an inspector to come
after agreeing.
And they give you a report that says, here's everything wrong with the house.
No, we don't have that. We don't have that. We don't have that at all. So what happens is, generally speaking, you have a survey done. So you agree a deal and you have a survey done. That's probably your inspection. You have a survey done and you're told what's right and wrong with the property. And it's up to you to negotiate with the seller. And the seller might say, tough luck, mate. This is how it comes, take it as it is, or yes, I'll repair that. There's no obligation on the seller to repair things found that are in the report, none whatsoever. But you haven't exchanged contracts yet. You've got your contract, your lawyers are dealing with a conveyance, you've had your survey done, and you don't exchange contracts until you're happy. Once you've exchanged contracts, there is no going back. There's no longer any 10-day grace period. And your system is very different from ours, because unless you agree an exclusive contract, the vendor can keep showing that property until the day you exchange.
Interesting. I did not know that. So somebody else can swoop in and take it.
Absolutely, and that happens quite often, or used to happen quite often. We can have an attended exchange. So in other words, I see a house I want to buy, and I go to my lawyer and say, go across to the other side's lawyer and get all the paperwork and do it today. And that can be done with great ease.
And so that exchange, is that the closing date? That's where everything is done?
No, that's the 10% date. It is
Got it.
effectively, it's effectively the lock-in date. The minute you exchange contracts, you're bound to make the completion payment. And if you don't make the completion payment, two things will happen. Number one, you'll forfeit your 10% deposit. Bang, it's gone. And number two, they can sue you for the differential between what you agree to pay and what they sell it to the next person for. Doesn't often happen because a judge will generally rule that 10% is fair.
And do the attorneys facilitate this as opposed to a title company here?
We don't have title companies.
So
We
attorneys.
don't have title companies. Everything is done by the lawyers, the conveyancing department of the law firm.
And is there a good, I assume there's very, very good history of property title there.
Of course. It's the cleanest. You get complete clean title in the UK. There's no ambiguity. It's complete clean title when you complete your transaction. Complete clean title. And the law firms are superb law firms. A couple of American firms here too, mainly big, Linklaters and Payne, Eversheds, many top-class law firms.
So we have very little time left. So I wanted to very quickly shift to any story. Of course, you've sold to some of the wealthiest, most notable people.
Sorry, just 1 second. I'm still on this conference call, Olga. We're leaving as soon as I'm finished. Bye.
What stories would you like to tell our listeners and me? Maybe a story that is interesting in selling a property that maybe you've not ever told before, or something that you enjoy telling, but something that has been notable in your career.
Got many of those. I don't know where to start. Okay, I'll tell you one. But it relates to something I sold in 1987, Britannic House West, which I sold in 1987 for £198 million. And a friend of mine who's in property but became a friend over the years said, listen, Gary, I've got this building. It's a fantastic building in the city of London. I want to redevelop it, and I want you to find me an equity partner who will put up 50% of the funding. I said, you're off your bleeding rocker. You're mad. Nobody's going to do that with you. But I'll tell you what, I think I can sell it. And I'll tell you what, I'll pay you a percentage of my fee for the introduction. And that's exactly what I did. I went to a friend of mine. I said, listen, I've got this building for sale. It's rather interesting. It's probably the best trophy building in London. What it might be hanging up here. It must be hanging up downstairs. And it's the best trophy building in London. And what do we do? He said, look, I've got a perfect buyer for it. It's a friend of mine who's Japanese. He wants trophy and only trophy. Let's meet him. As the people came over. And it was owned by British Petroleum, BP. And I went and saw the head of BP at the time. His name was Paul Gattrell. Paul, what do I have to do to acquire this building? Remember, this is 1987. That's 13 plus 23, 36 years ago. And I was pretty much a novice in those days. And he said, too late, mate. It's gone to the steering committee. You're out of order. It's too late. You're not going to buy it. So I went back to my buyer and he said, what do we do? I said, listen, I've got an idea. Why don't we agree to send him £1 million and tell him if we don't get the building, he can keep the £1 million, tongue in cheek. And he said to me, no, Gary, we're not going to do that. We'll send him £2 million. So we sent BP £2 million. We got the contract. And 6 weeks later, we owned the property.
That's amazing. So creative thinking, right? And how has that played a role, that creative thinking, in your success? I mean, very few people get to this upper echelon of real estate sales and have the personality to connect with these people. What do you think has led you here?
Love to tell you it's tenacity, and it is. And you have to think, I don't like the expression out of the box, but you have to think and think and think. And you have to, for example, today, seems so facetious of me to say certain things. But somebody phoned me up and said, we've got a property for sale. I think you should offer it to one of your buyers. It's 250 million quid. I said, no, that's not in his price range. It's just not in his price range. I'm not going to do it. And then I thought to myself, Gary, you're doing the absolute opposite of what you're telling your brokers to do. You're thinking for your buyer. Don't be so bloody stupid. So I phoned up the buyer and said, listen, I've got this property, 16 bedrooms, singing and dancing. It is 250 million quid. Would you like to see it? He said, yes, let's see it on Monday. I phoned the other fellow back. He said, is your buyer aware of the price? So I said to him, for God's sakes, what do you take me for, a novice? Would I ask you for an appointment on a property without telling my buyer the price? Of course I told him the price. And we're going to see it on Monday. I didn't think when I made the first statement. I made a judgment call myself, which was wrong. Don't make judgment calls. Every buyer has a different reason for buying a property. Every single buyer. And the most important thing you can learn, in my opinion, and I don't know how it works in America, but it works very well here in England, understanding that every buyer who goes out to see a property wants a hole-in-one.
Right.
He wants to buy the property. He doesn't go not to buy the property. He goes to buy the property. His intention is to buy a property. So he wants a hole-in-one. And I've always believed that the majority, not all, but the majority of buyers are both serious. Then three things. They're serious, they don't know what they want, and their budget is very fluid. I sold a house years ago to an Arab. He said to me, I want a freehold house on 2 floors only, detached freehold house on 2 floors only in Belgravia. Well, that doesn't exist. I sold him a 40-year lease. We don't really have leases very much anymore, and I'll explain that to you in a minute. I sold him a 40-year lease of a 7-story house with no garden in Belgravia. Again, don't listen to what the buyer tells you. Take him out, show him properties, understand what he likes. Show him 6 or 7 properties on the first tour, understand what he likes, and then then you know what he's talking about. Because he will tell you, and his emotions will tell you what he likes, not what he thinks he likes, not what he thinks he wants to spend, or not what he thinks he wants to buy.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's the beauty of housing, is showing up, seeing it, smelling it, experiencing it. The light and the bricks and the mortar is a unique experience for housing and for life, right? So how has your faith played into your business and into your success and how you operate?
In which way?
In any way. How has that impacted and influenced your life and your business?
I suppose that my moral ethics come from the background my parents gave me in terms of religion and education, and understanding that one has to live and die by telling the truth. You have to live and die by your word. And I think that's been very important with me. And I have a big problem when people say they'll do something and 3 weeks later they turn around, so I didn't like the idea, or I'm not going to do it, or no. And I say to them, you should never have said yes in the first place. You always have the opportunity of saying, no, I don't want to do it. But if you're going to do something, or you say you're going to do something, live and die by your word. I
can relate to that. Have you forged any really special friendships and relationships that have equated to time with people in this business? Anybody that's really interesting and special, where you've actually gotten to take that relationship in business and move it over to your personal life?
Quite a few. Not as many as one would expect over the years. But if you look at the agents I work with, or they work with me, etc., we are very close, in as much as we've worked together 20 or 30 years. The senior partners of Knight Frank or Savills or all the other agents, we know them all. We're in daily contact. And most of the brokers, it doesn't matter what level they are within their firm, are selling people. They sell. So you have an interaction with them, and they have knowledge, and you have knowledge, and that works together to put a deal together.
What about your customers?
I get on very well with lots and lots of customers and become very friendly with many of them. Not all of them, and I have the ability to choose who I want to work with or not. Some are phenomenally difficult, and you know what? not for me. Thank you very much indeed.
So
I
you,
think I have to go. My wife is waiting for me. We have a supper in 5 minutes, 20 minutes away.
we have gone over by 7. Thank you so much for taking this time. It's been really valuable and really interesting. I hope we have another opportunity to do that.
We can do it again anytime you like.
I have
I
not
work
been
very late at night.
I have not been to England in many, many years since I was a kid, but I have been, and I've really enjoyed it. I have very fond memories. So I hope to make it there. And do you have any questions for me before we go, or is there anything you want to tell them?
Only to thank you for choosing me. I hope I didn't speak too much rubbish. I hope you enjoyed speaking to me. I certainly enjoyed speaking to you.
I did. Anything you want to leave the people watching this with about yourself or anything else?
Ladies and gentlemen, I run Beauchamp Estates. Beauchamp Estates has offices, 2 in London, 1 in Mykonos, 1 in Florence, 1 in Cannes, 1 in Mougins, 1 in Cap Ferrat, 1 in Saint-Tropez, 1 in Tel Aviv, and 1 in New York. And we specialize at the top end of the residential market in every market we work in.
Gary, thank you so much. Have a good dinner, and we'll speak to you soon.